Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with Cole and Scott. And today's guest, Kris Saling, Director of Talent Innovation at the U.S. Army and author of Data-Driven Talent Management. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, watch our videos on YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. We are a listener-supported podcast, so please consider becoming a patron. If you'd like to support the podcast by becoming a patron, you can find a link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for being a listener. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization. Well, Kris, thanks so much for joining today. I want to get into, first of all, how you joined the armed forces. But before you do that, I hear you have a food blog. Can you talk to me about this? What's going on there?
I do. It was something I started up when I first started working at the Pentagon. Basically, as my husband told me I needed a hobby that wasn't work.
Because when I think Pentagon, I think food blog.
Of course,
right?
Who doesn't?
What's it about? Do you have like a specialty? Do you like what exactly are you reviewing, like fancy restaurants? Are you making your own recipes? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm making my own recipes. And a lot of it is when my husband and I first got married, I would make something and really not be paying attention to what I put in it. And he goes, "Oh, that was good. Can you make it again?" I'm like, "Oh, I probably should write these things down." And then it turned into, I'm going to keep them online so I can find them again because I've got stuff everywhere. It's kind of how we all are. And then it kind of turned into a thing. And it was an opportunity for me to do some nerdy data things and figure out, I was playing with different HTML codes, trying to figure out other ways to present recipes. I was online looking at SEO ratings and how to use social media. And it just turned into a very different way of doing a lot of the things I enjoy doing anyway with something that was totally not work.
That's it. It's funny. The funny thing about that, and I have a similar experience with doing the podcast and my newsletter, is presumably when people ask you about it, they think, doing a podcast and newsletter is all about recording the podcast or writing. And I imagine they think a food blog, it's about creating new recipes and writing them up. And you realize like most of the work, the real work is actually like doing technical things behind the scenes to keep your website running and like to make sure that you show up in a good ranking on Google or something like that. So it's funny to me that like that's the angle that you took at it from, but that's fascinating. Do you find enjoyment from those things?
I do. It's just kind of fun to try things and see what works and what doesn't. And I think that's probably the crux of it. It allows me to experiment with something where it's not my livelihood, or it's not, if I screw up, bad things are going to happen. It's okay, I get a few fewer views or something just doesn't take. But it really gives me a place to innovate, for lack of a better word.
So did the Army recruit you to write recipes? Like where? So how did you get into the armed forces?
Oh my goodness. That it was like I've gotten into many things. It was kind of a happy accident. When I was a senior in high school, I had, all kinds of big plans. I was actually very interested in going into medicine and going into pre-med. I had applied a bunch of places. Inexpensive little places like University of Chicago and Harvard and, UCLA and Caltech and places, they came with, $30,000, $40,000 a year price tag even back then. And I'm looking at this going, there's no way I'm going to be in debt for life. And started asking some friends. I was eligible for a few scholarships, but nothing that would have covered all of those. And somebody handed me a flyer for West Point.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sitting there, people dream of going to West Point. They prepare forever. And there's me sitting there going, oh, wow, I didn't even realize this was still a thing. About it in history. I've, read all kinds of different accounts of people who've been there. It's like, oh, this is still an educational institution. I started doing my research and it's a respected education institute. And I talked to a few people and they said, hey, if you're interested in pre-med, we actually have a very robust pre-med program and we have opportunities afterwards for you to go to medical school and da-da-da-da-da. It was like, oh, great. What does it cost? Oh, no, you get a stipend and we house you, we feed you. I'm like, oh, okay, say no more. I'm going to try this out. My mother looks at me and she's like, do you understand what you're getting into? This is the Army. And I said, I have absolutely no idea, but I'm going to figure it out. So I show up at West Point. We're not quite as bad as Clueless or Legally Blonde, but it was about like that. I'm like, okay, here I am. I'm going to join the Army. And of course, some of our higher ranking cadets had some fun with that. I really had a steep learning curve at first, but it just turned out the longer I was there, the more I fell in love with the service, the camaraderie, everything that we were doing. I loved getting out and getting my boots muddy. And that has just kind of persisted. It was always been like little chunks of, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for a few years. I'm going to get out. Now I'm going to do it for a few more years. Oh, here's another interesting job, or here's another opportunity. And here I am, still here.
So you're not on the civilian side, right? You
No,
were
I'm still in.
enlisted. That is fascinating. How many years has it been?
So I commissioned in 2001, which is a whole other interesting story.
Yeah.
It's a commission in June, and September 11th happened. But this summer, or actually next month, it'll be 24 years.
Oh wow. Well, thank you for your service, first of all. But
Thank you.
that is fascinating. So I am curious. You're doing talent innovation and in the U.S. Army. What role does people analytics or workforce planning or talent management play in talent innovation? Because again, that not necessarily like it's sort of an ambiguous term. So, like, what does that mean, and what role do these other disciplines play within talent innovation?
That's been the fun part about innovation because people use it so broadly and it's such a theater word, you can really use it for whatever you want. And what we used it for on the talent side is really kind of a combination of just kind of creative free range design thinking and experimental design. So
Yeah.
what we do with it is, because everything in there, people analytics, talent management, human capital transactional data,
Mhm.
preference data, assessment data, that's all the foundations of it. So what we end up doing is, brainstorming, design labs, ideating, looking and seeing what kind of things are pain points, both from a very free flowing method and then also from more kind of business process review, a little more scientific method. We kind of converge those and try to figure out what the biggest pain points are. Once we figure that out, we will go through and kind of turn those into try to design a hypothesis that we can test from those, go do some experiments, collect some data, calculate as close as we can to an ROI for different solutions for the Army, which is difficult because we're not just a nonprofit organization. We're an anti-profit organization. We consume, we don't really generate.
Sorry, can we sidebar on this for a second?
Absolutely.
Because, like, what does ROI mean when you're not trying to get a return on investment? Like,
Mhm.
is it more focused on effectiveness, or what? Like, what is the focal outcome that you try to measure or influence?
Well, for us, almost everything is driven by readiness, which is also a extremely amorphous term that is used to mean everything and anything. So what we've been looking at is trying to quantify the amount of minutes we can put on mission. So how can we give our soldiers back time to do things that are at their actual core competency?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fun because we've actually dollarized the amount of time we're asking people to spend on things that we can automate or that we can
Yeah.
fix with a business process change. And a lot of times it's the latter. Everybody always wants to go to a new tool, but it's like, look, if we just removed this particular segment of the process, this is how much time equivalent to the amount of taxpayer dollars paying this person's salary that we save, which adds a little extra punch to it.
Well, that's fascinating. So you told me in preparation for this, like doing this type of work is your dream job. Why? Why is it so? Like, I guess I mean you didn't want to be like, you know, I don't know, going into a desert somewhere, like, or like, yeah, I know, like, there's a few different things. You mentioned medical school earlier. You could have been a doctor. Like, there's all these different pathways you can go in the armed forces. Why is this your dream job, and how did you end up settling on this?
Well, this is another happy accident. I mean, because originally I was going into medicine. I ended up studying complex systems and discrete dynamical systems, getting into operations research when I was at school just because I love math.
Yeah, you're a
And
systems engineer, to be clear. Like,
right. Mhm.
you're not your traditional HR person.
No, I came to the chief of personnel office in 2016 having absolutely no idea what HR processes were. I had been using them for years, obviously, but most of the time it was just, going to my S1 shop and saying, "Hey, can you guys file this form for me?" So I get there and have absolutely no idea how any of these processes work, but I was able to dive into that. And again, just kind of a happy accident and dove into it and found out not only was I able to use all kinds of different mathematical processes, data processes, analytical processes, but I really liked being able to create processes that helped people. I mean, that's one of the things I love about this job is that it's so broad reaching. It's Oh, find problems in how we manage our people and fix them. Oh, great. Okay. I can basically do whatever I want in that space, find pain points and figure out ways to fix them. So for me, it was a dream job that I didn't know was a dream, but I kind of look back, like my whole family is in people stuff. My dad, he did marketing management for a while. He was a stockbroker for a while, but his main focus was really trying to help people make the most of their portfolios. My mom is a behavioral neuroscientist and my sister teach marketing and social media. So it's like we're all kind of in different elements of the people space. And my particular side, just coming into the HR side, still has elements of that communication, that marketing, the IO psychology, the customer experience. So we can get into some really nerdy conversations at the Thanksgiving table.
Well, I'm not sure. I either really, really want to be at your Thanksgiving table or I really don't want to be at your Thanksgiving table.
It depends how much you want to talk about work, but you talk about work all the time on your podcast. So
Yeah, maybe I get talked out about it. I don't know. But the reason I found out about you and it was super exciting because you have such an interesting and unique and eclectic background is your book Data Driven Talent Management.
Mhm.
When did it come out? What is it about? What inspired you to write it? And can you just kind of take folks through the writing process and what they might get out of the book?
Absolutely. So Data Driven Talent Management was released in August of last year, August 2024. And oh goodness, the writing process. I started keeping notes and started doing tons of research on all things people analytics, all things talent management from when I started getting into and really digging into personnel processes. It ended up just being piles and piles and piles of stuff that we used to inform our data and analytics program for the Army Talent Management Task Force, a lot of efficiency changes in the G1. We stood up the Army People Analytics Office. I had a few bosses who were kind of like, hey, we need to write down how all this came to fruition. We need some continuity. We need some this. I'm sitting there going, this is going to be the white paper from hell. Nobody's going to read this thing. But started writing until a friend of mine, Jordan Morrow, we worked together on a large number of efforts for Army data literacy. I was complaining about it when we were working on some of our other data literacy stuff. And he's written several books on data literacy. And he looked at me and he goes, don't write a white paper. Take out the Army specific things. Let's do some case studies, research this, and you should turn it into a book. I was like, I can write a book.
That's funny. I don't know him. I follow him on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
How did you two get connected? I'm just curious because he's a private sector guy, right?
Yes. Yeah. He kind of cut his teeth on data literacy things working for Click and American Express and did a TEDx talk on data literacy that I found a friend of mine had recommended that I look at it when we were trying to start our Army data literacy program. And it was just one of those great things about LinkedIn. I was like, okay, this guy is talking about exactly the kind of stuff we need. I'm going to reach out and just see if he is amenable to, answering a few questions and kind of helping us figure out at least where to get started with Army data literacy. So I reached out. I'm just like, okay, you don't know me from a can of paint, but this is what I'm doing for the Army. My client base is 1.3 million people. If you're interested in solving that kind of a problem and try to figure out how to make them all data literate, I would love to talk to you. So Jordan comes back not too long after that and he goes, this is fantastic. I'd love to chat. And so we had a number of different conversations about things we could do, things we could try, brought in a few of my other coworkers who were working on classes and ended up doing a lot of collaboration. He came out and spoke at some of our Train the Educator events, and it's just been a fun collaboration ever since.
That is fascinating. So when you wrote the book, because again I'm coming off the heels of just kind of finishing mine up and it's coming out
This is
soon.
exciting.
What was your, well, thank you. What was the part you liked the most, the least, and why should somebody like what's the unique angle you brought to data driven talent management?
So the part that was the most fun is I knew enough people who had written books that I got some really good tips for making it easier. They told me it's like, try to put it in your natural voice as much as possible. And of course, me thinking that and being a techie, I dictated a lot of my book to Google Docs using the talk to text while I was walking my dog. I divided everything up in a way so it was kind of like each chapter was either similar to a class I had taught or a keynote I had given since I talk about this stuff all the time. So that at least kind of gave me something to start with. Then I had to go back through, edit, add some resources, change some things up. But I think it really made it easy to put it in my natural voice, which for me, I speak very differently than I write half the time because I have to write a lot of tech papers. I'm sure you go through the same thing. And when we write through these tech papers, it's like they're accessible for a very certain audience. I wanted this book to be accessible to people who either had some analytics background or no analytics background and were looking at standing up a talent management or a people analytics program within their organization. So it's very much it's within it, it's the story of how we stood up people analytics and data-driven talent management in the Army, but it's really a how-to framework. And we provide a lot of examples, a lot of frameworks, a lot of ways to think about how to develop different use cases and how to walk those through where you need to collect data and how you can use it kind of end to end. So I think that's the value proposition of it. It's definitely not me sitting there trying to say, I know all this stuff about this, that, and the other thing. And like I have to do in my technical papers, which I personally don't like. It's me being able to say, you know, this feels a little bit more like my data literacy classes. I'm going to take you on this journey where you want to become data driven. You don't really know what that means, or you may have an idea of it, but just need a very kind of a practical guide of how to get there. And that's really what it does.
That's fascinating. You've written a book on data-driven talent management. It could probably be universally applied.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things in the private sector that is the most difficult to do is to get leaders to buy into data-driven solutions, not solutions they came to on their own. I'm assuming you encounter the same problem in the public sector as well. How do you create leader buy-in? How do you get them invested in these programs? What is your strategy, and how have you been successful doing so?
That's a question I get a lot because a lot of programs you look at that are successful, it's very much leader driven. The leader comes in with a change philosophy, with a culture they want to bring with them, and they can establish that. But the nice thing about being where I am is there are only about 350 people in the Army who outrank me, but most of them are in my building. So I have to figure out ways to build coalitions.
What is your rank? Sorry, I don't even know.
Okay.
Am I allowed to ask someone that? I don't
Yeah,
even know.
absolutely. No, I'm a colonel.
Oh, wow. That's a big deal. I know that word.
It's a big deal when you're out on some of our other posts, when you're in the Pentagon. I mean, and you see 2 stars picking up coffee at Starbucks and it's not just their coffee, it's like, okay, you're kind of low on the totem pole.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Keeps you humble. But yeah, it kind of, you're getting them to buy in really kind of requires that same kind of practical approach. I mean, they get a lot of people who come in and try and dazzle them with language, especially, we have a lot of vendor and industry partners who will come in and say, well, here's this, and here's this big whiz bang thing. I make cheat sheets. I mean, and in the back of every single one of my slide decks that I present them, there's usually a cheat sheet that says, here's what deep learning is, here's what machine learning is, here's what generative AI is, here's what agentic AI is. So all of these things they're being asked about, they at least kind of have, okay, here's I've got this. I have a data and artificial intelligence reading list where I keep track of a lot of reference books I recommend for them because they all like to read. Podcasts are especially important, so including Directionally Correct on there.
Oh, we were going to make it into the Pentagon. Look at that.
So yeah, we include podcasts. They love listening to podcasts. Everybody has like their whole list of favorite podcasts they listen to when they go run. And then just kind of people who have great content to follow on LinkedIn. As we have a lot of our leaders who are starting to get more onto social media platforms. LinkedIn is a comfortable one for them just because of the nature of it. And there are a lot of different places that they can go and learn and follow people and join discussions. So I will give them that as an opportunity to broaden themselves. We also have a number of different classes that we send them to. And it's always interesting to watch who gets the bug coming out of that. I mean, we have to watch them a little bit because they come out of those classes and it's like, okay, all of a sudden they have a hammer and everything looks like a nail. But when they've gotten the bug, it's a whole lot easier to bring them these solutions and say, oh, you want to incorporate some of this? I got you, sir. Let's lay out some things that we can do now, some things that we can do later. And I really try to use them as our advocates because once we get one of them, then we start building the coalition around them and bringing in other bosses and they kind of converge on a program. The hard part then is, of course, you have to deliver. You have to be able to deliver a solution. We study lots of different pain points in the enterprise and come around with kind of a ready list of things that we can do very quickly to show value for them. From that point, they're like, okay, I see the cost savings. I see the time savings. What else can we do? What else can you automate? It's like, all right, we've got it. We've got momentum.
All right. I'm going to ask you a really, really dumb question. One of the words I always struggled with as a kid was the word colonel because it is spelled like colonel.
I know. Isn't it awful?
Why is it pronounced the way of colonel, but spelled like colonel? And do you have any kind of
Knows?
backstory there?
I have, now I want to just go look it up because we joke about that all the time, but I've never actually looked up why.
Okay. I thought you might know the answer just because it's your current rank.
I should. I think I'm just so used to it being weird, and I mean that kind of tells you something about the Army culture. Like, what this is what it is. Okay, it's weird. Well, we'll roll with
So earlier in my career, every year I would go to PSYOP. I'd try to hit at least one or two sessions from folks at like, the CIA or the Army Research Institute or
it.
like one of these firms that are doing like really cool and interesting work, but in an environment that maybe I was less familiar with. Have you done any partnerships with institutions like that in your career and done any work with like IO psychologists? And if so, what was it about?
So the Army Research Institute is our primary partner for talent management. They have generated a lot of the assessments we use just because we need that IO psychology expertise for content validity, construct validity, et cetera. And then making sure that we implement them and are using the data appropriate to the instrument. Just because that's not a career field that we have abundantly out in the operational Army. We have it centralized there. So we have a lot of back and forth. We're useful on that side too, because if they have something that requires more experimentation and operationalization, how do we figure out how to get it into everyday business processes? Those are the kind of things that we can experiment with. But we've done a lot with ARI. We've reached out into other government agencies to collaborate too, just because we've all got different areas where we can collect and develop differently.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting just to do data exchanges and problem exchanges. We figure out pretty quickly that we're all kind of working on the same stuff, but we attack it from different angles. And the kind of that 360-degree ability to look at the problem has helped us generate some shared solutions.
Have folks just that this is an interesting point for me. Have folks from any other branches of the government reached out to you because of your book in terms of like sharing best practices?
I've had a number. I mean, I have a lot of crosstalk with the Marine Corps just because, folks either found me on LinkedIn or found my book or some or combination of those. My favorite though is my counterpart over in the Air Force, JJ Walcott. We had been introduced online a couple times, but had never really formally sat down. Turns out she's not too far from me. She actually lives down in Orlando also, and we commute when we need to up to the Pentagon when we're not working at our offices over on Research Road. We don't work too far from each other. But we hadn't actually met until we were both on a delayed flight coming from DCA to Orlando, sitting next to each other at the bar. And it's like, you're nerdy when you start talking about your work when you're sitting there at a bar at a delayed flight. But that turned into a lot of collaboration between Army and Air Force on what we're doing in talent management. And she kind of uses the book like, okay, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And half the time she smacks me with it. And she's like, I should have written, because I think I would have written a lot of this. And it was like, good, it makes sense. I feel validated.
You mentioned a fascinating story to me prepping for this podcast about some work you've done with O&A.
Mhm.
I wish Scott were here to hear it because he's a big O&A guy. And of course, I love O&A, but he loves it more than I do. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And I thought it was really interesting.
So that was my original job when I first started doing work as an operations research analyst. So I went back to grad school, taught at West Point for a couple years, and got sent over to Indo-PACOM. And that's a lot of what we were doing. We were doing counter-threat finance analysis, counter-terrorist analysis, trying to build network nodes throughout the Pacific. Yeah, that was just an absolutely fascinating job. We could figure out all kinds of interesting things to do with that data. That was my experience coming into the Pentagon also, and it's helped a little bit when I start looking at the different networks there and who's influential in each of those networks when we actually need to affect change in the in Headquarters Department of the Army.
Well, so you hit on an interesting point because this is one of my viewpoints on O&A. And it is a lot of folks look at it as like a statistical measurement tool to be able to, identify key influencers in an organization or see how communication is flowing or, find who the best mentors are or what have you in organizations. I always looked at it more of as a mental model
Hmm.
of like how to look at the world. And it's like if you understand how networks are interconnected, you can use them to be able to, honestly just navigate through the world more easily and, understand, where power is centralized, where decision making occurs, how to affect change, how to influence outcomes. And so hearing you say that makes me think like you kind of have that similar notion like you're a systems engineer, so you understand obviously how systems are complex and how they interact with one another, but also how does this play out in the real world, not just on a spreadsheet?
Mhm. Well, it's interesting you bring that up too, because everybody does like to look at the influencers. I like to look at the bridge nodes. It's like, who's gonna help me get my concept over here into this network? So it's like we've used that a little bit to kinda help infiltrate some of our different organizations where it's like our influence to influence is not carrying data literacy or carrying another topic. It's like, who is walking in between these worlds who can kinda lead up? So we have looked at that a little bit to get some folks more bought into some of the programs we're running.
So earlier you mentioned when we were talking about ROI that readiness is kind of the key focal variable that is trying to be influenced. However, as a historical notion, when I think of, government and public sector workers, the notion is always like, well, the timelines are forever, it takes forever to get anything done. How do you balance and square, implementing a new program and maybe it takes a little while with mission readiness being the most critical variable and like how does that manifest in the real world?
A lot of our slow timelines, unfortunately, are driven by the budget. So, I mean, like two things you can have in order to get anything quickly done in the federal government, frankly, not just the DoD, is you have some really creative budget people and you have some really creative acquisition people because they will figure out a way. Well, no, they understand their swim lanes and they understand how to navigate the full breadth and depth of the swim lane. I mean, I worked with an acquisition guy when I was at Army Human Resources Command who could recite our acquisition regulations, federal acquisition regulations backwards and forwards. He knew exactly what the space was, but he wasn't looking at it as constrictive. He knew exactly what it allowed him to do. And he was able to work very creatively within that space. And the same with the budget. The way we do our budget lines, nobody wants to look at a line that's just wide open with money for innovation because they're just like, oh, let's take that away. That's just going to be wastefully spent. That's just this, that's that. But what it does allow us to do is to pivot. We can actually be agile. We can say, okay, it's not set in stone that it will be this particular thing because we've also run into situations where for a budget analysis, they want us to look at, what different lines of code are you going to replace on this and how is this going to look? And we're talking 5 years down the road. But yeah, no, if you look at your iPhone, 5 years ago, did we know what this thing was going to be able to do? To the point where we could say this is what code we're going to need to replace? No. So when we start getting ourselves that restrictive, that's really when things start slowing down because you have to go back and mod that and you have to go back and revise it and people have to approve it. So, I mean, the big piece is just kind of making sure that you are able to get yourself the wiggle room you need and understand just how far you can go with that wiggle room in order to get things going.
1.3 million people is a lot of people.
Yes.
And I think, I'll be at a conference and somebody like, oh, my organization is so large. We've got 20,000 people. And so I wonder, is there anything that you get to do just because of the scale of the organization that would be interesting for others to learn? Is there anything that you're focused on right now that's really exciting that, you're really looking forward to?
The nice thing about having an organization of 1.3 million people, and for us, that's all three of our components, active guard and reserve, and we include our civilians in that number. We have even more people if you look back at all of the folks that Army Human Resources Command services because they take care of all veterans and all families who are collecting benefits. So it's more on the order of about 5 million people. But for our 1.3 million, I mean, it's very easy for us to, even with, small survey data responses for us, even if it's like a 5% survey, that's still a ton of people. That's still a ton of data to work with. So one thing we can do that I think it's harder for other organizations to do is we can segment that population. We can find out a lot of specificity to different demographics, to age, to rank, to location that I don't think you could necessarily do other places. We've done that specifically with a retention prediction model we put together. We've got that to the point where it can estimate out an individual vector for an individual service member and that it's highly accurate. Tells you whether or not they're likely to stay or to attrit. And that allows us to, we'll age that out using synthetic data and we can see just, where we might have holes in our predicted force structure, where we might need to retain some folks, where we might need to provide more training and grow some more people into those particular specialties. The thing I really want to use it for, though, is I want to test retention incentives and see what actually keeps people. Because if I have a large enough population of people who are likely to depart, who take this incentive and stay, then I can come back and tell my leadership, I can tell you about how much lift that you're going to get from offering this incentive to this group of people.
It's like a marketing analytic
Yeah.
almost.
Basically.
Happening.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So I wonder, like, one of the things that is really tough to do if you're trying to do statistics is if you have too few incumbents in a particular role and you just don't have that problem in spades.
We'd have to go really, really, it's like how many, 34-year-old left-handed blue-eyed people. I mean, we'd have to go really specific in order to have, small population error.
Is there something like, is there some kind of critical mass you get to where you can just find levels of insight that you can't find in other areas? Like I've never worked anywhere that had the level of data that you have. And so I'm fascinated by this.
It's hard to say. I mean, a lot of the problems we get into, we haven't really broken it out that way, but that's one of those things I would love to do if we had more time, because we end up getting focused on some pretty specific problems, and our ability to experiment. I'd like to do more of it, obviously. But that's one of the beauty of where we have all our personnel information. We have the person event data environment, and it has a research side of it where all that data is anonymized. And the whole purpose of that was to be able to partner with researchers. So we do have researchers get access to that and help us out with some of these things.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about like the amount of like causal research you could do because you have longitudinal data over time as well. And I mean, it's not like 5 years of longitudinal data. It might be 50 or 100 years, right? And you have data on them after, they retire and become veterans. And I mean, it's just the the possibilities are endless. But I'm going to quit being excited and geeking out over that for a second. Kris, would you like to join me in Cole's Corner?
Absolutely.
Welcome to Cole's Corner. All right, let's start out with some rapid fire. And this first one should be an easy one.
Uh-oh.
What is the best branch of the military and why?
Oh, God. It's hard for me to say anything but Army, just because, everybody goes, oh, you should go Air Force because they have it cushy, because they do all the technical things and everything else. The Marines have their value. They know exactly who they are. They know exactly what their brand is. Everybody's kind of familiar with what the Navy does. But the Army is just, there's so much opportunity to do just about anything that you could want to do with the Army. And you might see some of our advertising and go, okay, what exactly does Be All You Can Be mean? And it really is that. It's like there are so many different opportunities to pursue things that you're interested in, to pursue things that you're passionate about. And it is an absolutely amazing team. I mean, I've worked with some of the most energetic and creative people I ever could have hoped to meet in this job.
This is not rapid fire. I'm just curious. You made me think of this while you were saying it. Like if somebody was entering like the armed forces today, how is their career path different to yours when you started? Like, and is it transforming at the moment?
Oh, constantly, because the spaces that we're training in have changed. The equipment we have has changed. I mean, every once in a while, I do go walk around a different post and kind of look and see what everybody's doing. Some of the fundamentals are the same. Everybody's all still trying to, make sure their stuff isn't leaking in the motor pool, or they're out on a rifle qualification range. So a lot of that is the same, but they have, better equipment, better gear. I mean, when the first time I deployed was into Iraq in 2003, we were part of the leading edge that did the border breach and kind of opened it up for Third ID to go through. We had just kind of whatever equipment we had at the time. We had soft skin Humvees. We had things that may or may not have been desert camouflage. We had a lot of learning to do in that space. Now I walk out and see, especially some of the site equipment and the robotics and just so many different things folks are getting to play with. I mean, it's just very much enabling the creativity of our soldiers.
Again, like somebody who's doing people analytics or doing research in like a graduate program right now, if they, had a curiosity, would you encourage them to go either enlisted or civilian side to working with the military?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different opportunities there, but we don't really think about the Army or about the services in general as kind of a post-secondary education lift. But we have so many different things that people can do and study, and plus the associated benefits with it. I mean, not to put on my recruiting hat, But we do have credentialing assistance, tuition assistance, and the GI Bill if you stick around long enough. But the really fun stories for me are about soldiers that we've had join the Army who end up having incredible experiences and then are able to turn those into amazing post-Army lives. I mean, one I particularly I love this story. There's a young engineer who was working in Chittagong in Bangladesh on floodplain data. They were doing a lot of things to help Bangladesh recover from some significant coastal flooding.
Yeah.
And he started looking around, talking to people. He's like, okay, the seas are rising there. They've lost a couple islands. How does this work? I want to study climatology. Started turning this into a individual research experience. Ended up getting accepted to MIT to study complexity in weather science and climatology. So, I mean, that to me was just like something he never thought he'd been doing. He just not much history of that kind of level of education in the family. And now he's at MIT just because he had some great experiences in the Army, found something he was passionate about, and went from there.
See, go to the Army, you can do anything.
Pretty much.
Well, back to the rapid fire for a second. Sorry, I derailed us, but that was actually really fascinating.
Oh, good.
What's the place you've never been to that you most like to go and why?
So that's another thing with the Army. You get to travel a lot. Both my sister and I are one of our bucket list items is to go to Antarctica because it's the one continent neither of us have been to. A lot of it too is just to kind of have that experience. Just you've heard so much about what kind of an experience it is to see someplace that just remote and removed from everything. There are a lot of other places that I could list too that I want to see, but that one's kind of high on my list.
Why do you do what you do?
Because I want to make opportunities for talented people, especially in the services, who might be otherwise. Some background, the first 7-8 years of service, it's very much about being absorbed into the unit and culture, which means it's also very much about compliance and conformity. That tends to drum out our innovators. So what I want to do is widen the aperture for them so that they're not as constrained, so that they the baseline experience that they need to understand how the Army operates, but so that they can still find those opportunities to broaden, innovate, and achieve what they want to achieve.
I've had this thought for virtually my whole career, which is, and this again, private sector side, but you're talking about something fairly similar, which is like, I think most future CEOs that are in an entry level role would get fired.
Mhm.
Right? And it's because a person comes in, they don't like taking direction from others. They have like a bold vision for the world. They, are probably an incredibly high achiever. They probably are usurping the people who are their superiors, all of these things. And, probably it's hard to tell them what to do. And so you look at that person and the manager just goes, God, I just want to get rid of this sore thumb. I just get him out of here. And that's the same person who might transform that organization someday. And so it sounds like you're kind of tackling a similar issue in the military. How do you address it? And how can any organization address this from a talent management standpoint?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, just kind of looking like the Fire OB assessment, I mean, these are all your folks who are zeros and nines. They hate taking direction, but they'll give direction. And they really kind of need ownership of their own little whatever it is. So that's me and my entire team. I mean, there's no reason we should function well together because if none of us want to take direction and we all want to give direction, how can we possibly operate? Well, everybody is kind of king or queen of their own little domain within that. It's like, this is you, this is your project, this is your area, this is your functional area. And we're seeing that a little bit too with a program we just started up called the Army Junior Officer Council. Is we have a lot of these high achievers who really have good ideas. They want to be able to bring their solutions to the Army. They don't have an inject or they don't have enough of the background experience in figuring out like the swim lanes we talked about earlier. So what we do with them is we bring them into this program. We provide them an opportunity to explore problem sets and create solutions, but we also provide them kind of a middle level mentorship inject. So that, mostly group of, kind of O4s, O5s who are experts in particular areas of how you do acquisition, logistic, whatever it might be, pair up with them and they'll say, okay, you've got an idea. Here's how you go and get it routed through the right channels. Here's how you can take and own that idea. So I got two things out of this. I mean, for one, my junior officer council is extremely happy because they can, take an idea and actually work it and sometimes get it implemented. They've already written a couple policies that have gone up to my boss. The other piece is I'm now developing junior officers who have experience at the enterprise level. So by the time they are senior leaders, not only have I given them a little bit of an outlet where they're not just doing their conformity piece, they get to experiment, but they're not coming into the enterprise for the first time. We're not doing that kind of initial orientation about how our enterprise works differently from their tactical commands. They're already kind of there.
I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I have a feeling you have this keyed up in the back of your mind. Like, what are the competencies or just characteristics that you guys look for in like a future 4-star general, right? Or something of like somebody who's going to be really guiding the forces in the future. And what do you do to kind of accelerate those people's careers as well?
It's interesting because the things I think we look for are not necessarily the things we get in our high ranking generals. Because if you ask a particular proponent, they're going to say, well, this person needs to have this set of experiences.
Yeah.
I did a project maybe 3 or 4 years ago where I went around and interviewed a lot of senior officers about the experiences they had. And the one thing that was surprising to me is I asked them, it's like, did you have anything that you did that, you had to fight your career manager on that everybody said would tank your career? And would you do it again? And all of them said, yes, I took this opportunity. I took this broadening assignment. I went and got this degree. I went and did this thing. Everybody said, no, it would destroy my career. And it's like, well, obviously it didn't work because you're 3-star or 4-star.
Yeah, but there
So
might be some survivorship bias. You're not accounting for all the dead bodies that were left behind of people who did it and then go, yeah,
fun part. This is the fun part because they went and did this, but they had a mentor. They had a mentor or protector who could come in and say, okay, now you're going to come use this for me. I had a little bit of that experience too, because I think a lot of the time is I kind of fell into that, high achiever who doesn't listen to direction model for a lot of my career. And I had a lot of people who was just like, okay, we need to get you out. You were just doing your own thing. You're not doing anything we want you to do. But I also had a very large number of people who were like, okay, you are interesting. We are going to take you and we are going to channel you. And that's one of the reasons I ended up doing a lot of the work I'm doing now is I had a boss who was not my boss at the time, General McGee, who was the director of Army Talent Management. He's now director of the Joint Staff. We had a couple conversations about data and talent management. And I basically told him they were doing it wrong and looking at it wrong. But he was just like, okay, I need this. Come here and tell us how to do it right. I'm like, oh, really? Get free range to do this? Sweet. So that's kind of at least where you can kind of grab your change makers. But I think the folks who are really successful at the higher level are the ones who don't look at you and say, okay, you must do this, you must be this. They look at you and kind of go, you're interesting. How can I use you? How can I help you? How can I empower you and aim you? And I don't know if there's a way to quite assess that, but it's like, well, everybody likes to look at the successful World War II generals. They look at the Eisenhowers and the Pattons, but you got to go back and look at the people who chose them. It's like, who found these effective people and turned them loose? And a lot of times it's the same couple of people.
that would be a fascinating set of case studies,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it doesn't just have to be World War II. It could be up to the present moment and just say, you know, presumably, because again, you guys have hundreds of years of data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was the cohort analysis of their compatriots that were at their level? And then what distinguished, oh my God, that would be
Yeah.
fascinating.
We did some initial, again, kind of coming out to ONA, look at those networks and kind of see who picked up who as they were going along. And it's almost like these comet trails. It's like you see this one very powerful rising star who has a lot of people kind of circling in their orbit. Sometimes those people will shoot past them, others will trail off. But the commonality is like they all have a little bit of provenance with one of those leaders. They all got picked up in the comet trail somehow.
That is so interesting. I got one big question for you. How do you think people analytics, workforce planning, and talent management differ the most in the public sector versus the private sector? And what is the public sector getting right that people in the private sector may not know about?
And this is hard for me to say, having been public sector my entire career, but just kind of looking out at private sector, a lot, our processes are inflexible. There's a benefit to that for the people who get into them, and there's a little bit of stability and predictability that you're coming in at this particular grade, you're going to march along, you will progress at some point, or you can find that stability. The problem is that keeps us from being agile and being able to move people to the places where they're best used. We are starting to break out of that mold with some of the authorities that we have recently. So we have the ability to move people a little bit faster and to get them put against the problem sets that best use their abilities. The difference between, I think, the things that we can do in the public and private sector can use a lot more data than we can, even though we have a lot. Because when it comes to people, we're constrained by the Privacy Act. We're constrained by the Paperwork Reduction Act. There's only so much data we can carry, and we have certain responsibilities with it. We have to get exemptions for a lot of the stuff we're able to do. The thing that we do, though, is that we are looking at these problems. We are doing the research. And in a way, we have, even though a lot of our folks' data is protected like that, we do have years and years and years and years of it because we're required to keep it. I mean, when you think about the Army, we're a 250-year-old institution this year. So got our birthday coming up in a few weeks. We've got a lot of information that we can draw on and a lot of history where we can point definitively to policy changes that have affected the way we do business. I think if we're able to leverage that and all the techniques underneath people analytics and strategic workforce planning, and just having the ability to sit and be retrospective about that a little bit, we can learn a ton about how people work, how people thrive. And especially right now when we're integrating more AI into the space, is one of the things we're trying to work on is how we integrate that, not as something that augments all our different technical processes, but if we're looking at who does the work, I mean, that workforce planning has to include the machine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's do some what am I reading right now? All right. So for the first topic, this is a post from a behavioral scientist named Pell Hansen about some of the work that they have done with the OECD. And they say, are our lists of biases holding us back? And so things like loss aversion, optimism bias, present bias, and the list goes on. And they propose this framework called the BASIC framework. But one of the things that they mention here, and the main reason why I wanted to bring it up, is they introduce this concept of bias hunting. And so instead of trying to look at human behavior kind of objectively or just, without any prior notions or biases, because of our notion of like we have, I think there's over a list of 100 cognitive distortions and biases now that we look for. But because we have these biases, we look for them, or we kind of index to them immediately. And so I thought this was fascinating in the sense that they're trying to say, perhaps we shouldn't have a bias for looking for biases when we're looking at things. And I had never heard anybody come across this before, but how did you react to this one, Kris? And I don't know, how have you seen this manifest in the world?
Now, that's a fun part too, because it talks specifically about teaching versus diagnosing. And when I read this, immediately I started thinking of, when a doctor's going through something and looking for symptoms, oh, they got a diagnosis.
Yep.
That's kind of where things stop and they do a prescription instead of like, well, let's dig deeper into the cause. Let's actually do root cause analysis. Because I think the moment we get to a point where we're ready to label something, we cut ourselves off from the rest of our curiosity and the rest of our ability to investigate it. So we talk about this all the time in the things we're doing for promotion and selection in the Army. How do we remove bias? And we list out all the number of different types of biases. And we're just like, let's not look for those biases, because that restricts us from looking for other things that might be, proximate cause for some of these things happening. Let's go to the data and let's actually go through and explore what's happening and dig into why it's happening.
No, I thought that was fascinating. And thinking I think about it from more like a private sector perspective, is you'll be working with a client and they'll have a hypothesis in mind of why they know something is happening. And they're like, all right, I need you to work with me to go prove my hypothesis is correct.
Oh, that's every senior leader I work with.
Exactly. And so I look at this and I say, but behavioral scientists are just as guilty of that behavior as anyone else. And so they go into it and they say, I'm studying XYZ bias. Therefore, every nail, I have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I'm going to find it under every rock I turn over. And the reality is, if you're not looking at the situation objectively to say, is it present here? Is it not present? And so I thought this was a fascinating one. And I loved your perspective on this. All right. The next one we have got an article in the Journal of Consumer Research called Collective Layoffs and Offshoring, a Social Contract Account. And so this is from a professor, Stefano Puntoni. I think he's at Wharton, and some of his colleagues. And he's talking about how when you think about different reasons that people may or may not get laid off in a job, that for whatever reason, people feel more betrayed if it is due to offshoring or outsourcing or companies deciding to move operations into different areas. And this is a tricky one to cover. So I waited till I had somebody on who's not in the private sector because, as far as I can tell, I don't think you can outsource a job in the Army because you need somebody to do that job. Anyway, and so I thought this was a fascinating one in terms of, what's going on at the moment. And I've got an article coming out that I'm still kind of noodling on how to do it, called about a global wage. And what I mean by that is I think corporations, so not the people who run them, but corporations themselves have an incentive to try to get to a point where everyone is paid a global wage rather than wage differentials paid by, certain countries have higher rates or certain cities and countries have higher rates than other areas. If we could just get to the point where talent is dispersed everywhere, that would actually compress wages to have a global pay rate. And so I looked at this and I said, yeah, but if corporations get their way, that is a fundamental breaking of the social contract associated with work and how people feel about moving jobs from one location to another, which is a very hot topic right now at the moment, frankly. And so I wanted to get your reaction to this. And I don't know, did you have any research that you guys have done on the social contract or anything like that?
A little bit, because we're digging that back up right now because of all the delayed resignation program, all the DRPs. We're doing a ton of restructuring, and we're having to look at the automation side of things. The article talked a little bit about both offshoring and automation. So we
Mhm.
can't really offshore what we do, but we can sure automate it. And there's a lot of fear, a lot of betrayal, like you're getting rid of me so you just do my job with a machine.
Yep.
So it's like, how do we get into, I hate to just say it's like simple change management because it's beyond that, but at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to communicate, how to bring on these processes and how to work around those feelings, because what we're doing is a necessary evolution of work.
Yep.
So I think we're looking at evolving the tasks that are being done versus, replacing the jobs. And
Yep.
that way we're evolving somebody's workload. So you are rolling off some of these things, you're rolling on some of these things.
Well, you mentioned an important part that I left out, which is people feel like it's much more of a breach of trust
Mhm.
if you can do a job, like you can do a job effectively, but they just hire someone else to do that same job at a lower rate
Mhm.
than if automation comes along and can do that job virtually for free. I think
Mhm.
people they don't feel good about it, obviously, but they understand it. And why this is relevant at this moment is AI.
Yep.
Right?
Mhm.
AI and there's different components. Like I don't think any job right now, and I think some of the research that Anthropic has done, and frankly some of the research my own employer has done, like Cast, have shown that no job has been 100% automated by AI yet. Right now, and it may never come, but
Mhm.
significant portions of the tasks that people do could be automated over the next few years. And so this kind of social contract look at this equation I think is really important at this moment. And especially, some of the stuff that you were mentioning as well about what'd you call it, DRP and how that's going on too. So I don't know. This is fascinating. Any other comments on that one, Chris?
No, because I think about the betrayal element of it too. It's like there's only a certain amount we can say, oh, we have to do this as well. Some of it we are being directed. But I think it's just kind of the feeling that you are choosing to do this. My work isn't good enough. My work isn't this. I think it's very hard for people not to take it personally. And I don't know. We're going to have to dig really into that on how we can actually keep our workforce, keep them growing and changing, and especially too, because we talked a little about it earlier about how the federal government has kind of long been seen as a place of stability.
Mm.
And I think there's never actually a guarantee that we're going to keep everybody working their particular job. But it's like if you do want a place that has stability, that's where we've been. We're no longer stable.
Yeah,
So a lot of people, I think, and that could be a large underlying factor, is that previous perceived social contract that we are offering stability as part of our value proposition.
absolutely. That's fascinating. Let me hit you with the last one really quick. All right. We got friend of the podcast, Scott Ryda, recently published a post called Evaluating Talent Hubs, a data driven approach using generative AI with Tableau. And so I'm not going to go too much into the details of this article where he shows all the like things like the talent pool size, the talent pool growth, the annual total compensation, the cost of living, all the factors that might go into why an organization might choose a particular talent hub. Even though I will make one piece of feedback to Scott here, you might not want to trust every piece of output that generative AI creates because you can't necessarily show the chain of custody that data is necessarily accurate about that talent, but the methodology here is fascinating. The thing, though, I wanted to talk to you about, Kris, is one of the things that I think about in my day job is, in the past, talent intelligence, and a big part of talent intelligence is location strategy. So organizations deciding to put, a location here versus there. Should we expand into this country versus that country? And how does that affect us from a talent profile standpoint? But also because of my work at my current company, Lightcast, they also work with a lot of municipalities who are trying to attract those organizations to come invest in that community. And that's especially prescient at this moment where a lot of manufacturing is being reshored and things like that that's going on.
Mhm.
But I was thinking about you guys and in the in the Department of Defense, how do you guys pick where to put like a base? you know, and like like what is the location strategy and the site selection look like from that lens? And I was just curious if you had any insight on that.
Well, a lot of for the large bases, it's congressional. I mean, there's almost a, "Hey, we need this post location, we need this," because obviously, we're always being pressured to make sure that we are cutting costs, and we're gonna look for large locations where it's relatively inexpensive. So that's where you get your Fort Cavazos and your Fort Sill, kind of in the middle of sprawling nowhere, where we can drive tanks and blow things up and not bother people. But we've really had to take a look at this with our recruiting reform over the last year, because one thing we really do have a lot of flexibility out is where we put our recruiting stations. So that's kind of equivalent to what I think what the private sector does in providing a location for an organization. It's like we're going to look historically at where we've gotten a lot of interest, where we've gotten a lot of strong leads, where we want to interact with the city, where we have a strong veteran presence because our veterans are our best recruiters, and we'll start moving more people into that area to go out and talk and bring folks together. I would love to put more smaller organizations out and about. I mean, we had a lot of that prior to the Base Reorganization and Consolidation Act. So BRAC really took us out of the public. I mean, between BRAC and I think 9/11, we started pulling ourselves back from interaction with the public onto these large mega bases. And I think that impacted us significantly because there was a while there where everybody kind of knew a soldier, or you'd see people walking around. They were from this little tiny post wherever. I mean, even we had Fort Ord and the Presidio up in Monterey, and then we gave those up. It was heartbreaking to me as a Californian because it's like, okay, could eventually go close to home. Not anymore.
And nine.
But but as we did that, it's like we're looking at how we are able to keep in touch with those municipalities, the people who might want to have more of a presence for our soldiers, especially too. We ran a pilot program this past year too, looking at people who would opt in for post of choice for their first duty assignment preference versus taking a large bonus. And a lot of people they wanted to choose where they lived and worked versus the large bonus. So it's like we almost had the reverse aspect of that too, allowing our individuals to pick where they wanted to be, where they wanted to go. But yeah, for us, largely, we don't really get to choose where we are. The only thing we get to do is to say, here's where we're going to. Well, I can't completely say that either because we have had some new headquarters stand up. We have had some new organizations stand up. And we did look very hard at where we wanted to put people and what the vibe was there, especially when we're starting up new innovation organizations, new scientific organizations. It's like we wanted to put them in a place where they had stimulation of that creative mindset. So, I mean, we looked at lots of different places for that.
Does the Army have a base on Antarctica?
We have stations on Antarctica.
It's very Antarctica. So
We do.
there's hope that you can check that box off at some point, right?
I think there are plenty of times that some of my bosses would like to send me there, but no, eventually we'll get there.
the talent pool may be low, but there is a lot of space. So there you go. But Kris, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. This has been one of my most informative favorite episodes in a while. So thank you for doing this. Any final words where people can find you and anything like that and find your book and all the good stuff before?
I really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to seeing your People Analytics book coming out soon too. No, I'm very active on LinkedIn. If people want to see more of more of me running my mouth on my favorite topics, that's where I spend a lot of my time. I do have a Substack, and my book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Walmart and everywhere you can find where you find your favorite books.
Well, Kris, you've been fantastic, and you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Kris Saling. Thanks for joining us, Kris.
Awesome, thank you.